This is a story of how a small Balkan nation turned a threshold into transformation. It's not just about NATO accession, it's about sovereignty, identity, and strategy done differently. This is the wise way in action: compound thinking, polycentric empowerment, and anticipatory design, all co built, not commanded. Now, let me take you back to the Western Balkans winter 2018, a time of geopolitical churn, regional fragility, and a country standing at the threshold of transformation. That country was the Republic of Macedonia, and its aim was bold: NATO accession. But behind that goal lay a critical condition: the urgent development of credible, implementable national strategies for countering violent extremism and counterterrorism. These were not paperwork exercises. They were prerequisites for joining the alliance. Enter Wilson Strategic Enterprises, or WISE. We weren't the first to be asked, but we were the ones who accepted what other firms saw as, frankly, a mission impossible. Because when the traditional firms faltered, paralyzed by overprescribed frameworks and rigid deliverables, we were brought into the mix to accompany, not to dictate, to co-build, not to command. We began where others often gloss over: by listening. Our first move was not to deploy templates or best practices. It was to conduct a compound threat mapping exercise, customized to the Macedonian context. We facilitated deep dive SWOT analysis across at least three levels: national, municipal, and regional international. We embedded with local leaders. We sat down with minority community elders, convened workshops with border control officers and imams alike. What emerged was a clear picture. Macedonia was a geostrategic pivot state at the once vulnerable and vital moment. In that moment, we identified the first truth in transition. This wasn't just about NATO. This was about Macedonian sovereignty, legitimacy, and identity in a post-war region still healing from scars. With the landscape mapped, we initiated our AIM cycle: assess. Through facilitated dialogue, the National Conference on Counter-Violent Extremism and Counterterrorism came to understand the interplay between foreign fighter flows, organized crime, and ideological extremism. Implement. Rather than write the strategies for them, we guided their team to author them for themselves, ensuring full cultural legitimacy and institutional ownership from the get-go. Monitor. We embedded monitoring mechanisms into the strategy itself: milestone-linked, real-time evaluative dashboards co-owned by ministries. This wasn't linear planning. It was leader teaching and action. And here's the counterfactual. Had a traditional firm run the process, it likely would have defaulted to sequential logic: counterterrorism first, then counterviolent extremism, ministries in isolation, plans delivered as PDFs, not processes. That path would have produced compliance. Ours yielded conviction. We launched a 3D plus C campaign inside the Macedonian government itself. Defense. We empowered the Counterterrorism Task Force with interagency response protocols. Diplomacy. We positioned and helped position Macedonia credibly to the European Union and NATO by linking counter-violent extremism and CT strategies to United Nations and OSCE frameworks. We nested. Development. We integrated the strategies into national developmental planning, linking economic opportunity to de-radicalization. Commerce. We elevated economic revitalization as a long-term counter-violent extremism pillar, positioning market inclusion as a preventative tool. This was not stovepipe capacity building. It was compound campaigning, and it worked. By April 2018, the strategies were not only finished and finalized, they were nationally adopted, fully implemented, and externally validated. Here's where we embedded the future. When it comes to tactics, we taught how to use counter-violent extremism and counterterrorism combined, not just as operational silos, but as converging domains of preventive engagement. Teams. We established integrated task forces like the Macedonian Joint Terrorism Task Force, or JTTF, that align police, customs, border security, and social services. Technology. While not AI driven per se, especially in 2018, we began the foundation for future platform integration, mapping actors, behaviors, and flashpoints through shared digital tools. Again, had traditional firms run this phase, the technology component would have either dominated, turning soft security into surveillance, or been ignored altogether. We found the middle way, tech augmented humanity. We didn't leave behind static documents. We left behind living institutions. Through embedded training, learning labs, and peer-led rehearsals, we transformed the 44-member NCCVECT, that National Commission for Counterviolent Extremism and Counterterrorism, from a newly minted committee into a strategic brain trust. We trained them not just to implement, but to teach others. What was the result? Counterviolent extremism and counterterrorism became not just plans, but capabilities, resilient, adaptive, and exportable. Other Western Balkan states are now studying these as regional templates. We concluded by future-proofing. We stress test the strategies through scenario exercises. What happens if a major economic downturn hits and extremist recruiters capitalize? What if cross-border flows surge again? Together, we built contingency playbooks, not just for threats, but for opportunity capture. What happens when Macedonia gets the NATO call? What's the next institutional frontier? On February 6, 2019, Macedonia did receive that call, but they didn't just receive it, they were ready for it. And that is the WISE difference. Now, let me paint the counterfactual. Imagine, if you will, if the strategy had been built using traditional best practices. That would have yielded a CT strategy from a donor PDF, a counter-violent extremism plan written by an external consultant and presented via slide deck, implementation as a compliance check. That's the linear extractive model. It produces paper. What it rarely produces is power. Instead, what we did was hand the Macedonian people a mirror, not a map. We helped them see themselves, and in doing so, help them chart their own sovereign course. So what made the WISE way work here? Just a few notes. Compound framing. We didn't see the Balkans as a post-war legacy zone. We saw it as a strategic hinge for Europe's future. We enlarged the context. Polycentric environment. We didn't centralize control. We decentralized capability. Narrative legitimacy. We taught the strategy through story, enabling leaders to lead in their own language and consistent with their own culture and their own heritage. Anticipatory architecture. We saw convergence before crisis and taught the NCCVECT to do the same. A brief final reflection, a turning point. This was a turning point in the Balkans. This was not just about a consulting engagement. It was a chapter in the modern story of the Balkans, a historic moment. It was a moment when a country stood up, not just to say we are ready to join NATO, but they proved it through coherent, credible, and compound security strategy. And the WISE way didn't deliver that transition, it accompanied it, teaching Macedonia to lead through transition, to lead through their own transitions, not just to be led. That's the essence of this method. That is the promise of this moment, and that is how we turn thresholds into transformation. This, folks, is the WISE way. Thanks again. Cheers.